men's basketball and football revenue together. It's looking at the difference between the high and the median, just the difference. So this number, 51 million, is 62 million minus 11. You see that that number is growing over time, right? 51, 73, 98, $121.8 million. The difference, the absolute difference between the highest school and the median school is growing, and it's growing at a rapid pace. This is dividing all of the FBS schools into percentiles or deciles, 10% groupings. And it's looking at the standard deviation in each one. You can't see it because, well, I'm not going to be able to pull it up either. But what you would see is that in 2003, the standard deviation is 16 and more than doubles by fiscal 2010. So this is doing basically, this chart is doing the same thing, but it's breaking it down by conference rather than percentile, and the result is the same. This number is more than twice as high. The standard deviation is more than twice as high when you go to 2010. So this is a chart about one of the consequences of what happens when you spend a lot of money and an increasing amount of money on athletics, which a lot of schools do, right? FBS is a very competitive conference. Everybody's going for the Holy Grail. Everybody thinks that they can become Nebraska or Notre Dame or FSU or whatever, or Alabama or whatever school that you're shooting for. And how do you do that? You spend more money on facilities, not only stadiums, but also practice facilities. You spend more money on tutoring facilities. You spend more money on recruiting. You spend more money on all sorts of things. And so one of the consequences of that is that the amount per athlete that you spend is much, much more than the amount per student. And so this is a chart that shows you for the FBS schools, between 2005 and 2008, that this is the amount per student that's spent. It's about 12,000 per student. And per athlete, it's up over $84,000. I looked at the numbers online through the EADA reports for CSU, and in 2010, CSU was spending $78,000 per athlete. This is breaking those numbers down by conference, and you see that the Big Five conferences are spending, in the case of the SEC, 10.8 times as much per student athlete as they are per non-athlete, and so on, until as you get down to the lower FBS conferences, the ratios are 4 and 5 to 1. But in order to get in those top conferences, there has to be more and more of dedication of spending dollars for the athletes. So one of the other things I want to call your attention to is that one of the most outstanding features of the economics of college sports today is that these Big Five conferences have been starting their own sports networks, and they've been entering into new contracts with national media, and between their local, between their own networks, like the Big Ten network or the various Pac-12 networks, between that contract and their secondary contract with national television and their primary contract with national television, the average school today in one of the Big Five conferences is getting somewhere between $20 and $22 million per year in television money. And that's appealing, because if you look at some of the lesser ones in FBS, if you look at Conference USA, or you look at Mountain West, you look at some of the others, the new AAC conference, they're getting about $1.5 million on average per team. $1.5 million on average per team versus $20 to $23 million per year per team. So you look at that and you say, gee, all I have to do is get promoted into one of these Big Five conferences and I'll be golden. Well, the two problems with that is, number one, it's pretty complicated to get promoted into a Big Five conference. I mean, one of the Big Five conferences. In my view, it wouldn't make any sense, for instance, for the Pac-12 to come to CSU and say, you want to join, because they already have the media market of Colorado in the Pac-12. So when they add schools, they're trying to add schools that will add media markets. They're not going to add schools that don't bring them into a media market. And there would be some other issues as well about adding CSU. But beyond that issue, there's this. I believe, and most of the people whom I work with and talked with on a regular basis in the sports industry believe that there is a bubble, a television bubble, in sports in general, and certainly in college sports, but in professional sports as well. Where did the bubble come from? Bubble comes from a number of places. One place it comes from is the advent and then the great popularity of the digital video recorder. That we're able, all of us are able, by pressing a button, to record a show right now, and then an hour later, or 5 hours later, or 2 days later, or 2 months later, we can press another button and watch the show that we recorded. And when we press that button, we can skip over commercials. 11% of the U.S., according to a recent survey, 11% of the U.S. television viewing public does not watch, only 11% watches their shows live. Now, I'm not talking about shows other than sports shows and news. 11% watch live. So that means 89% are watching a taped version of their show at some other time, and having the capacity to skip over the commercials. People like to watch their sports live. Practically all sports fans watch live. There are a few fanatics, nuts, who will watch it, 5 hours later or 2 days later or whatever. Practically everybody watches it live. So if you're a company and you're trying to advertise, you're trying to reach a certain demographic to sell your product, and you know that only 11% of the people are going to watch, I don't watch television, so I'm going to date myself and say Seinfeld live. Only 11% watch Seinfeld live, then you're not going to have much of a motivation to advertise on Seinfeld. Or if you do, you're going to say to the producer of Seinfeld, I'm only going to pay you 1/10 of what I used to pay you, because I'm only getting 10% of your audience. But what that corporation is going to do, recognizing that advertising on the television serials isn't nearly as valuable as it used to be, they're going to go to sports, because sports is watched live, and people won't skip over. Some people will go to the refrigerator and get a beer, but people are not going to be able to skip over the commercials. You can't fast forward a live commercial. And so there's a lot of, over the last, as the DVR has gotten more and more popular, there's been a migration of advertising to sports. And as sports advertising has become more popular, and the spot rates, the amount of money you pay for an ad, goes higher and higher, then there are more and more companies that want to produce sports and want to buy sports rights for their regional sports channels. Now that whole process, I think, has played itself out. And one of the ways in which it's being forced to play itself out is that on-demand is now increasingly inserting the technology so that you have to watch the commercials when you watch a show on-demand. So the whole effect of DVRs has been part of the bubble over the last several years, and it's probably going to diminish, if not completely disappear. So that's one factor. Another factor is that we live right now in a period of enormous uncertainty about media distribution. 10 years ago, pretty much all of us who were getting television in the household, we either got cable or we got satellite. About 10% of the households got satellite back then. Virtually nobody was getting it from what are called telcos, that's telephone companies that would lay fiber optic wires and have enough bandwidth to carry the information to send you television signals and give you high-speed internet and so on and so forth. That's all changed. It's all changed, and now there's competition between the telcos and the cable companies. And satellite has grown in its capabilities to provide good signals also. So there's much more competition. That's a big change. Another big change, and actually a larger change, is that increasingly people are getting their video on the internet. Whether it's live video, whether it's sports, whether it's movies, television serials, or whatever it is, they're getting it on the internet. And they're getting internet, not on the internet, they're also getting live television shows. And sometimes they get it directly on the internet, sometimes they get it on what's called an over-the-top medium. or you can get it on something like Roku, or you get it on Google, a Google box. And so the ways in which we can go and get the programs that we want to watch is multiplying many times over. So what is the response that the traditional cable providers have in that environment? The Time Warners and the Comcasts and Cablevisions of the world. Well, what they want to do when they see themselves losing a grasp, losing the kind of total and monopoly control they have over distribution of video systems, what they want to do is to go back to the source and own the source. And then no matter who the source gets sold to, or no matter how it gets distributed, they'll be able to get some money from it. And so what you have is a lot of these cable companies are going to the sports teams and forming sports teams, regional sports networks. The sports teams don't have to put any money into that, but then they get a lot of money when they generate subscribers and advertising for their regional sports network. So that institutional uncertainty that has been pervading the media market over the last 10 years has created increased demand for ownership, either ownership of a sports channel with the team, or locking the team up to long-term rights deals. So there's been more and more demand for the team's product to go onto television, to go onto some video outlet. That's raised the cost, that's raised the rights fees and the price for all of this. So you have a variety of forces that have been acting here, pushing up rights fees. Now, one of the consequences of higher and higher rights fees is that the cable companies and even the telcos have to either raise the price that they charge the household on a monthly basis, or they have to do, I was talking to Jay Coakley about it just before, what Verizon is starting to do is offer a non-sports package, where you don't have to pay for ESPN, which charges for ESPN $5.60 a month, which has to get passed on to the consumer. And sports teams are charging $2, $3, and $4 a month for their games. And there's one thing after another. If you live in Denver and you have 4 sports teams, and each one is charging several dollars a month, and you're paying $5.60 for ESPN, and another $1.50 for ESPN2, and more for ESPNU, and more for ESPN Deportes. All of this stuff is adding up. Now, some households are able to deal with that. They're okay about it. But you know, the average income of U.S. households in real terms is not higher today than it was in the 1970s. A lot of people can't afford to pay that, and they're objecting. They're objecting to their representatives, and the people in Washington are starting to pay attention. And so there's also a threat of legislation that will mandate a la carte programming, where consumers will be able to buy what they want to buy and not be forced to buy everything. And so the non-sports fans won't be forced to subsidize the sports fans anymore. It's also true that a lot of these contracts that you read about, supposed long-term contracts that say, ESPN is going to pay the Pac-12 $15 million a year for the next 25 years. And I'm not sure that's what it says, but it's something like that. And it's similar for each of the Big Five conferences. Those contracts are not ironclad. They have clauses in them that say that the rights fees that are going to be paid are based upon performance thresholds being met. Subscriber fees for the channel and advertising for the channel. And if those thresholds are not met, then ESPN can renegotiate the contract. So even this $20 to $23 million figure that's going to the average team in the Big Five conferences, that's far from a sure bet today. In other words, although I'm not saying when it will happen, when a bubble is going to burst, it seems like we've gotten the bubble as big as it's going to get, and it might flatten out for a while. But don't be surprised if you start hearing about media companies going under, and that abrogating contracts or contracts getting renegotiated. So I thought I had another slide, but let me conclude, because I think I've gone on longer than I was supposed to go on anyway. I think that the lesson that I draw about this increasing inequality in college sports, along with the growing deficits, is it's very perilous to try to emulate the Alabamas of the world. Very, very few schools ever get to do that. The increasing inequality has meant also an ossification of the conference structure. 2 years ago, or even this year, this is the last year of the Big Six conferences in the BCS. The Big East was part of the Big Six conferences. Now it's down to the Big Five conferences. The Big Five conferences are having a variety of conflicts within college sports. There's this case, there's a cost of living attendance case, there's an O'Bannon case. Those conferences want to behave differently than the other conferences in FBS. The other conferences in FBS don't have the financial wherewithal to meet some of the new demands. So these Big Five conferences don't really want to be in the same conference anymore with the Mountain West or with Conference USA or with the new AAC. They want to be in their own conference. And so there's talk about not only having a new subdivision within Division I, but maybe a whole new division altogether. And there are even some people who are talking about, let's get out of the NCAA and do whatever the heck we want. So I think there's an increasing caste system within college sports that's going to make it increasingly difficult for the CSUs of the world to get up. There was a lot of mobility in the last 4 or 5 years. That mobility, I think the door started to close, and if there are a few schools still that might be able to get into the top 5 conferences, it's going to be about particular characteristics of that school and the media market and the corporate base in that area. And then finally, even if you do, and I think it's a very, very long shot, even if you do get into one of the top 5, I provided you, I think, with information to suggest that even then, it's very hazardous to think about generating surpluses instead of generating deficits. Thanks for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will entertain questions from the audience. Tom has the mic. If you would give us your first name. Try to keep your questions very pointed and very short if you can. And we have a couple of experts also here who can help answer some.
My name is Hank Zentbrad. I pay tuitions and fees, and I'm a taxpayer. And my question is, where is the point of account? Where is the... Yeah, I apologize for that. My name is Hank Zentgraf, and I pay taxes, I pay tuitions to CSU, and I pay fees. And I would like to know, where's the point of accountability for these kinds of issues? Is it the Board of Agriculture? Is it the President of the University? Is it the state legislature? Or is it the governor? Where is the point of accountability?
I'm not the one to answer that. Somebody else will answer that.
You know, basically, as I understand it, it goes up from the President to the Board of Governors. We have tried to address both of those with our data, and we have been turned down several times. They don't appear to be very responsive. They don't appear to want to listen to our side of the story. And I wish I had a good answer for you. You know, maybe if you come up here, if you've got a question, and then we can use this mic to make it a little bit easier.
Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Greg. My daughter will probably be going to CSU in a few years. I'm curious, what are the odds, if you had to place a number on it, that the pro stadium folks would actually get to realize their grand best case scenario?
I'm not going there.
Why isn't your daughter going to go to Smith College? So the best case scenario, I guess, is the one that's put forward in the CSL report. And they have 3 projection scenarios, a low, medium, and high. And I think that their low is completely unrealistic if you look at comparable experiences. And again, you know, the most comparable recent experiences are Berkeley and Minnesota. And they are in one of the Big 5 conferences. And Minnesota plays in Minneapolis, St. Paul. That's one of the major media markets. I think it's the 14th or 15th largest media market. And Berkeley plays in the Bay Area. So they have all the stuff going for them. And if they can't make it work out, it really is a great enigma how on earth CSU would ever do it.
What's the odds? What are the odds? One in what?
I'm not a betting man.
First, an observation, there are 5 professional sport teams in there, not 4. MLS. Everyone, public ones. There was an article in the Denver Post this weekend that suggests that it's inevitable that they'll start paying football players and basketball players in college schools. How do you see this playing out?
You don't want the odds that it's going to play out? Is that right? Is your daughter going to go to Smith? Stanford, all right. So, you all heard the question about what are the odds that the college athletes are going to start getting paid, and if that does happen, what does it do to college sports? One of the things I didn't talk about, but I think it's important to think about, is that college sports is at a crossroads right now. There's the O'Bannon case, which is about publicity rights, about whether or not athletes can sell their images when they're not playing in the games. And if they can't do it, why is it that the NCAA or conferences can do it and get money from it? There's a cost of attendance case that the typical football player in FBS is limited by how much he can get in a grant and aid or in a scholarship by the NCAA. They can get tuition, room, board, and mandatory books and fees. But they can't get all the other costs of attending a university. And Mark Emmert and before him, the Miles Brand, the heads of the NCAA, have estimated that those costs of attendance are $2,500 to $3,000 above the scholarship. And now you have very strong centrifugal pressures from the Big Five colleges about breaking off from the FBS or even from the division or even from the NCAA. So there are a lot of issues that suggest that college sports in 5 or 10 years might not be anything like what it is today. There's also the issue of concussions and playing football. How are American fans going to be responding to that, not only at the college level, but also at the level of the NCAA and also at the level of youth football? It's not clear yet how we're all going to respond to the obvious, very grave danger that comes from playing football and other contact sports, for that matter. Whether or not college athletes will get paid is, I think, a really complicated subject, and I can talk about it literally for hours. My own view is this, that if you're talking about FBS, which is, again, the top division, the top subdivision and the top division, the average school, the median school is losing $12 to $15 million a year. If you want to pay college athletes on top of that, that money is going to come out of probably the general fund. It's going to deplete education money. I don't want that to happen. It's possible in the context of other potential reforms, like taking down coaches' salaries, or why is Rick Pitino getting $7 million a year coaching the basketball team at the University of Louisville, when the college president gets 1/10 that amount, or less than 1/10 that amount. And he's getting paid more than NBA coaches, even though an average NBA team generates about $240 million in revenue, and the average, the top 10 basketball teams in the NCAA are generating about $30 million. So, what's going on? That's clearly an area where there can be reform. In order to reform that, you need an antitrust exemption. There's another issue as well, which is if we're going to start paying college athletes, what system are we going to use? Are we going to have an open marketplace? Are we going to have a salary cap system? Are we going to pay only the top 5 stars on the football team and the top 3 stars on the basketball team and give everybody else a scholarship? And if we pay any of those people, what happens to Title IX and dealing with women the same way that men are dealt with? So I just think there's a tremendous number of questions. The bottom line for me, though, is that I don't think there are the resources available, as college sports is now structured, to pay them. And that, in fact, most of the people who are veritably exploited by the current system are people who are the true stars who are going to go on and play in the NBA or the NFL anyway, and they're going to be earning millions and millions of dollars, assuming that they don't get injured and hurt and have their careers ended. They're going to be earning millions and millions of dollars. And while they're in college, they're treated rather well. So my own view is that I would like to see reform along the lines of giving athletes the possibility of getting a cost of attendance allowance increase. I'd like to see some of the reforms that are contemplated in the O'Bannon case. And I'd like to see a lot of other reforms that would improve the lives of college athletes. But actually creating a labor market of some sort is not something that appeals to me as an educator, and it's not something that appeals to me as somebody who studies finances.
Thank you for the short and concise answer.
Mel Hilgenberg, first of all, I want to thank SOSH for having brought Dave Ridpath some time back, but even more so, you expanded, elaborated, escalated a lot of what he said. My question is, both in his presentation as well as in yours, is there a strong direct correlation between the rising of handheld devices, tablets, and what you mentioned about internet access? Because he mentioned even Duke and North Carolina can't fill their basketball arenas right now. Correlation?
So it's actually the smartphones and tablets is something I didn't mention that's changing the media landscape, that increasingly people are watching their sports on those gadgets and not on the television. So that creates yet more uncertainty. But so there's a basic issue, right? As the digital revolution proceeds forward, and as our ability to be entertained in the home is enhanced every day, and as our ability to watch an NFL game on a 55-inch or 80-inch high-definition television, and high definition is also improving as I speak. As that's happening, and as we can sit on comfortable living room couches and chairs and not deal with bad winter weather by going to, they don't call it Invesco anymore. What is it called now? Oh, Sports Authority Stadium, right?
Sports
Field,
Authority.
Sports Authority Field.
Are you going to ask a question?
Okay. So there's an issue about, Duke basketball losing attendance, and there's an issue about professional football losing attendance. The youth of today, the students of today, receive their entertainment differently than we received our entertainment. They're responding to different signals than we responded to. I find it hard to project exactly where that's going to go in terms of attendance at arenas and stadiums. One of the things we were talking about in the car on the way up is I have the sense that the NFL anyway is missing the boat. The NFL is trying to compete with the experience in the home, with lots of digital gadgetry and wireless capabilities throughout their stadiums, and then having special rooms where you can go and you can watch all the NFL games at once and get excellent wireless reception. Because I think one of the things, and this is another one of my short answers, Bob, so I heard him say he wanted the questions to be short. He didn't say anything about the answer. I happen to think that one of the wonderful things about sports, and by the way, even though I say critical things about it, I'm a sports fan, and I think sports plays an important role in our culture. One of the wonderful things that it does is that it brings people together. It creates a deeper sense of community. It gives people an identity. It gives people something to share with each other and talk about it as they're going to work each morning, or talking over a water cooler, or going up in an elevator. People who have very, very different lives and very different jobs, they can all talk about the same thing. What happened in the game the night before, what's going to happen in the game tonight. And then, very special thing is to go to a stadium, and you're there with 70 or 80,000 people from your community, your larger community, and somebody on your team throws a touchdown pass, and you all stand up and you scream and you applaud and you give each other high fives. And it might be a superficial expression of community, but it is one, and it's one of, I think, the most emotive ones that we have in our society. So I think that sports is great, and for that reason, if no other. And therefore, I think that the NFL is missing the boat a little bit when they say, come to our stadium and you can have the same wireless access and you can stare at your smartphone all the time if you want. You don't have to watch our players. And you don't have to stand up and high-five your neighbor. So anyway, I hope that answered your question.
Wayne?
Hi, I'm Wayne Gutowski, and my question really is directed towards a hypothetical question towards the leadership of SOS. If the stadium is not built, is SOS going to be one of the leading contributors to refurbish